President-elect Biden's victory was made official Monday after electors in states across the country formally cast their votes. The president-elect addressed this in a speech from Wilmington, Delaware, where he hailed democracy.
Our democracy pushed, tested, threatened, proved to be resilient, true, and strong. The Electoral College votes, which occurred today, reflect the fact that even in the face of a public health crisis unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetimes, the people voted. They voted in record numbers. More Americans voted this year than have ever voted in the history of the United States of America.
But with President Trump and his supporters still refusing to accept the result, what is usually a routine step in the process has become an anxious moment for American democracy. CBS News correspondent Nicole Killian has more from Wilmington, Delaware.
Ayes 55, noes 0.
President-elect Joe Biden officially sealed his win as the state of California pushed him over the top. Fulfilling their constitutional duty, electors certified the results in state capitals.
I have 9 votes cast for Donald J. Trump.
School gymnasiums.
The electors have concluded their business.
And on Zoom.
Please hold up only your ballot.
Presidents and politicians, past and present, among those casting ballots.
I am pleased to announce that Joseph R. Biden has received 16 votes for President of the United States.
In Michigan, legislative offices were closed based on credible threats of violence, and state police had to block a group of pro-Trump supporters from entering the Capitol. Wisconsin's Supreme Court rejected another legal challenge from the Trump campaign 1 hour before the state's electors convened.
I worry about the country having an illegitimate president. That's what I worry about.
And President Trump refused to back down, unveiling new campaign ads with fraudulent claims.
Some states rushed out mail-in ballots, a recipe for fraud. Dead people voted. Ballots miraculously appeared. Biden ballots added in the middle of the night.
While his advisors drew a new line in the sand.
The only date in the Constitution is January 20th. So we have more than enough time to right the wrong of this fraudulent election result.
But even some Republicans are calling on the president to accept defeat.
Once the Electoral College settles the issue today, that it's time for everybody to move on.
Meanwhile, Dr. Jill Biden is getting support from Michelle Obama after a former Northwestern professor writing in the Wall Street Journal urged the future First Lady to drop her title, saying it sounds and feels fraudulent. The former First Lady said of Dr. Biden, who has a doctorate in education, all too often our accomplishments are met with skepticism, even derision.
For more, I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Linda Tran, Leslie Sanchez, and Ed O'Keefe. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. Linda is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist. And Ed is a CBS News political correspondent. Welcome. Caitlin, let's start with you. What was the goal of the president-elect's speech?
Well, this was to definitively declare victory yet again. There were many similarities to the speech that he gave in Wilmington when Pennsylvania and thus the presidential election was called for him several weeks ago. In that speech, he was making a call for unity and bringing the country together. We have seen that all the states have certified their elections, and of course today the Electoral College met in all of the states and again certified the elections for Joe Biden. So the message today was one of, look, this election is over. The president pursued every legal avenue that he could. Biden said today that he was denied no course of action to challenge the results. He also noted how many times judges dismissed attempts by the Trump campaign to overturn the results, Republican and Democratic judges alike, or I should say judges appointed by Republicans and Democrats. And so he really kind of laid out exactly where we are. He also mentioned Trump by name several times, and that's a contrast to some of these other speeches that he's given trying to bring the country together. He was making the point that this election is over and it's time to move on. Now, Congress will certify the results on January 6th, and Vice President Pence will oversee those results, and that's a role that Biden himself has played. Back in 2017, he was presiding over the certification for then President-elect Donald Trump, and so he referenced that tonight as well.
And Linda, how important was it for the president-elect and Democrats overall to address the Electoral College process and the results of the election?
Well, I think it was important, Elaine, in that I'm sure folks have been following some of the criticisms that have come specifically from the left since several years past, that the Electoral College has outlived its utility. In fact, we've seen steady trend lines over many cycles now of the popular vote, the total vote count cast during an election, not really lining up with the margins that we see in the Electoral College vote that is usually, frankly, an obscure and procedural affair, which today had lots of eyes on it because of the last 6 weeks of President Trump trying to undermine that process. I think it was important for the president-elect to walk through the various things that we've seen happen during the course of those 6 weeks, and also to state unequivocally that it is time for the nation to move on, and that specifically we have far greater challenges, much more important issues that the president currently and the president-elect will need to deal with, including the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, Ed, we heard from a number of Senate Republicans Monday after the Electoral College certified the presidential race. Republicans have been reluctant to acknowledge Joe Biden's win, but that appears to be changing. What are they saying and why now?
Well, they're coming around to reality and realizing now that given that the Electoral College did what it did today, given that virtually all legal avenues have been attempted and exhausted, more than 80 cases, as the president-elect suggested, that it's Joe Biden who will be president starting on January 20th. And it's remarkable, again, that we have to sit here and have this conversation at all, that he had to give a speech tonight that sort of reiterates things that he had said in one way or another, by my count, about 4 times since the August convention, where he tried to give big picture calls for unity and how he would try to be the president for everyone. And, he did it again tonight, but did it only after explicitly laying out everything that the president had basically tried to do since the election to try to contest the results and then say, look, it's over. You got to move on, and the country needs to move on. But look, for those Republicans, and today it included people like Senators Rob Portman, Roy Blunt, Mike Braun of Indiana, John Thune, who's in leadership, saying he's the president-elect. It's time for Republicans to accept this and to move on. They look at polling like ours from yesterday that found that just 6 in 10 Americans, only about 62%, believe that the election is, quote, over and settled and that it's time to move on. Incredible to think, just 62%. So while Biden tonight, the president-elect, was trying to speak to all Americans and was saying that he wants to be president for 100% of all Americans, it's really that 38% that he was trying to speak to some extent, by laying it all out there again, making the case that their preferred candidate, if they're among those objecting to the results and still questioning them, has lost, has exhausted every avenue at his disposal, and that, as he said, it's time to move on. So it'll be curious to see in the coming days whether we see more Republicans, not only members of Congress, but governors who might have been holding out, and of course the president, admit what is going on here. And in many ways, suddenly the president has. He has, started to appoint colleagues and allies to boards that are going to outlast him at the Pentagon or in other parts of the government. He's, he and his family have begun to make plans to move out of the White House, probably to Florida most of the year. So we're going to, but the question is, will we see an explicit, I get it, it's over, I concede, or some kind of a gesture like inviting the president-elect and his wife to come to the White House for the formal post-election meeting that often does happen. And if that happens, when would it happen, how would it happen, and how awkward might that be, given that these two have been at loggerheads now for, the last several months since the general election began.
All right, Leslie, I want to get you in here. Joe Biden criticized Republicans who backed a challenge brought by the Attorney General of Texas, which sought to overturn the results of the election. Now, the Supreme Court rejected that case. Leslie, should Republicans be worried about potential long-term repercussions from their support of that?
Not at all. I think that's where the big disconnect is between kind of the Washington political establishment trying to understand that they can do all these speeches, they can say all these things, and they're pointing to a third party, right? They're saying the Electoral College. It was not part of the campaign. This is an independent body that has now certified the election. And there are still grumblings and hand-wringing. There's still hand-wringing within the Republican Party. And that will continue. If anything, there are a few things I don't expect. I don't expect the president to concede. And that is coming from individuals on the ground, talking to folks and looking at a lot of survey data. They don't expect that. And they said they would quite honestly be shocked if the president did. This is not my opinion, but this just speaks to where the tone is with Republican voters right now. They feel that the election had so many irregularities in voting that they do not have that confidence in the final tally, in the final result, despite all of the evidence to the contrary. And because of that, it's creating a different type of political storm that's going to really continue to grow as we go into 21. And the outcome is not traditionally what we expected. So if we thought this was going to be a nice transfer of power, it's really not going to be, and it's hard to see where that gap closes in terms of more Republicans getting on board and moving into governance. They're just going to be doing it begrudgingly.
All right. Well, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Linda Tran, Leslie Sanchez, and Ed O'Keefe, thank you all. It is wonderful to see all of you again.